Hello, my name is Jared Tanimoto, and I'm here with Jonathan Wallentyne, the founder of Actuarial, and this is our monthly Portfolio Manager Q&A. So I was reading some of the portfolio notes this month, and to dive a little bit deeper, I wanted to ask you a few questions pertaining to risk and how Actuarial manages risk. To start off, what is it that Actuarial does to reduce risk exposure?
I mean, the simple thing we actually do is we sell. And so there's all types of different varieties of assets out there. There's, treasury bonds which are really safe, and there's emerging market, let's say India, Chinese stocks, Brazilian stocks. And so when we want to reduce risk exposure, we're typically selling the riskiest positions, which is typically are equities or stocks, whether it be domestic or international. So we sell them. That's how we reduce it.
So is it possible to know when there's actually a crash that's going to happen?
Absolutely not. You can't predict a crash, and really, I mean, the reason why is because the actual point at which there's a turn or the market's going to go down is in fact random.
So if you can't predict when the market crash is about to happen, then what are some of the steps you could take to possibly avoid it?
Well, the good thing is you don't actually need to, predict the exact point when it's going to turn in order to avoid a loss. All you really need to do is you need to be cognizant of what the probabilities are. And so over time, I mean, every day, frankly, there's probabilities of different outcomes. And so, instead of trying to pick, well, what's the point that it's going to turn, it's as the probability gets really high that there's actually going to be a drawdown or the market's going to lose value, then you can start reducing your exposure. And so you gradually start reducing to make sure that you're not taking on any excessive amount of risk to squeeze out a little bit of return. And so that's basically what we do. We don't try and pick the exact point. We just adjust how much risk exposure we're going to have based on the probability of a bad event happening.
So how did you know to move out of equities before the global crisis of 2007 and 2008?
Yeah, I mean, I get that question, and I think people misunderstand that. I didn't predict the crash. It's just that at the point in which it happened, our total risk exposure in the portfolio, meaning the riskiest tend to be stocks, was actually completely sold off. So by the time the crash really happened later in 2008, we actually had no stock market exposure, but we didn't predict it. What really happened was, in the beginning of 2007, the LIBOR interest rate, which is kind of, people hear that number, but it's really the rate at which banks lend to other banks. And there's this, what I consider to be the most, people, you watch the news and you see the S&P and the Dow. That's not the most important market. The market for money is even more important. And in early 2007, money markets started breaking down, meaning that rates started going up. And what that really implies is that banks didn't trust other banks because they were demanding to get paid more money to lend money to other banks over a short period of time. Sure. And so what that means is that, well, if banks don't trust other banks, this definitely is going to change the probability of it spreading to the market. Doesn't mean it's going to happen. I didn't know when it was going to happen or anything else, but what I did know was that in order to get the additional return and participate in the market, I was going to have to assume a lot more risk because there was already a structural flaw in the system.
So going off of what you just said, why didn't anything fundamentally change in the markets when it came crashing down in 2008?
I mean, when I say that it fundamentally didn't change, what I'm really referring to is the fact that the probabilities hadn't fundamentally changed. So, I don't know if I could give an analogy for this, but just because it actually crashed and that event happened doesn't mean that the likelihood of that outcome had changed at all. It was actually the same outcome and the same probabilities because the credit markets had already kind of broken down. There was already a structural problem. The probability of a loss was extremely high, and then it eventually happened, and then people look back and say, Oh, well, it was completely, random that it crashed. It's like it was within that distribution. I mean, that's the scenario that we were thinking about, when money markets broke down in early 2007. And so once it finally materialized, it was okay, that's the path that it ultimately went down, which was, part of the probability. Now, could banks have built back their trust in one another and things kind of returned? That was another scenario. It had a very low probability of that happening. The higher probability was that the market was going to go down. And so that's why we adjust our positions the way that we did.
Well, thank you, Jonathan, for answering some of these questions and diving a little bit deeper into some of the questions I had for you. I guess in closing, I just want to say I hope you enjoyed this month's Q&A, and I hope you look forward to next month's. Thank you.
Thanks.